Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Ladan Jiracek.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today's guest is Ali Samiian. He's from Poplar Access Advisors. They do healthcare reimbursement. So he's the founder of Poplar Access Advisors. They help medtech and neurotech companies navigate reimbursement and actually get paid for their innovations. He has over 20 years of experience across pharma, devices, including leadership roles at Abbott, Novartis, and Cala Health, where he secured reimbursement for first-in-class neuromodulation therapy. He now works with startups to align regulatory and reimbursement strategy early so great technologies can actually reach patients. So thank you for sending me that bio, Ali. And we met, I think more than a year ago at the Neurotech Leaders Forum. And it was we had a nice dinner, a bunch of people, and healthcare reimbursement is something that's very important because healthcare or medtech innovators are like, okay, I got a great idea. I got a great patent. I was able to get FDA approval, and therefore I win after all that goes through successfully. But there's a third step, a third hurdle, and you kind of help people get through there. They have to actually get paid, and people don't want to get paid in magic beans. They want actual money. Do you want to introduce yourself better than I just did?
Sure. You know what? You did a great job. I am Canadian by background. I got my law degree in Canada and got my start in healthcare working as a payer. So I was providing advice to the government of Ontario and Canada about which products should or should not be reimbursed. And that's how I figured out the ins and outs of healthcare and how different components of decision making come together to really formalize that decision. So whether you're looking at clinical studies, guidelines, stakeholders, all of those different components come together to get to a yes or a no. And like you mentioned, almost 20 years of Novartis and Abbott pharmaceuticals launching new innovative technologies. So I'm a bit of a launch expert, establishing new categories. And my mission is to actually get products in patients' hands.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool that you were on the other side of it too, and you were able to you're maybe able to experience both sides and be able to think like the opposing party. And that's probably a good way to understand it. So what is reimbursement? Why do you call it reimbursement? Why not just paying or insurance payment or something like that? Is that all that is, or is there more?
There's definitely more, I would say. And it's funny, when I started my career, Ladan, I was thinking about reimbursement as getting a product on a formulary. As soon as you got it on a formulary, my job was done. It was up to the sales guys to go sell. And if there were issues and the physicians weren't prescribing, or if there were challenges on the distribution side, all of that was someone else's problem. As I've grown in my career, and over the last 6 years, I've been at startups, and in the startup world, you wear many different hats, and reimbursement is not done until the patient has product in hand and we get paid. So when I talk about reimbursement, it's a very holistic approach to reimbursement and market access, actually, and making sure that access is open from a patient perspective. So in terms of who the payers are, right? The world is changing. We have cash pay, right? So it's not insurance payers. You have cash payers. You have commercial insurance payers here in the US. You have Medicare. You have Medicaid. Employer-funded services. There are so many different components to what reimbursement looks like and who pays that it would not be fair to just call it payment. And then the other part of why reimbursement is critical and why we call it reimbursement, typically reimbursement has three legs to the stool. If you think of it, you have payment. So you have coding, payment, and coverage. Coding, and we're already getting into some of the meaty stuff here, but if you think of coding is basically how a procedure or a device is identified in the system. Then you have coverage, which is who is going to be eligible to get this product, and payment is how much does the service or product get paid, right? If any one of those pieces is missing, then the whole house of cards comes crumbling down. And we can get to a yes, but it's just a much bigger, heavier lift to get to that point.
Okay. Yeah, that's a lot of things. Yeah, obviously they have these huge tables that are able to tell what procedure's done, how much they should pay for it. How many codes are there? Is it 100 or 1,000, or it can't be more than 1,000, right?
You know what? There's a lot of codes and they keep evolving. So the AMA, there's HCPCS codes, right? And those are typically used for devices. And then you have CPT codes that are also a form of HCPCS codes, category 1, 2, and 3. HCPCS codes. So you have the HCPCS codes for devices, CPT codes for procedures. AMA is responsible for producing the CPT codes. And then the CMS is responsible for producing and managing the HCPCS codes. And there are tons of them. And just to make it even more complicated, now we're getting into the sausage making, there's modifiers that go with each one of those codes. So if you exponentially start getting bigger and bigger. But honestly, I think that might be a little too complicated for the audience.
Yeah, really. And it's application specific and depends on what they're doing. Okay, how hard can that be, right? We're working on a medical device. You're like, okay, I'm doing some kind of stent or something like this. Let's say stentro, neural implant. And then, okay, I've identified a code and we're ready to go. So how do you, working as a consultant, is it just a 1 hour consultancy or something like that or what?
So it really depends on the process, right? So oftentimes what we do is we'll work with clients. There's multiple mistakes that happen throughout the launch of a medical device. And let's face it, most medical devices don't fail because they don't work. Medical devices work great oftentimes. They can't commercialize, and that's the big challenge, right? So that's the challenge we help overcome. And the biggest issues that I see, I can break them down into 3 big areas. One would be regulatory pathway. Oftentimes, the founders think, what is my fastest way to market? So let me quickly get to market. And once we get FDA clearance, we'll figure out the rest. If you use the wrong precedent and you're not happy with the coding and the payment amount of that precedent, there's really not much that a reimbursement expert can do for you. You're bound by that. So what we do with our clients early on is as they're evaluating regulatory pathways, we evaluate the reimbursement pathways associated with those regulatory options. And what does that mean in terms of commercialization? Are there codes that exist, or do we need to get new codes? If the codes exist, are we happy with the payment amount, or do we need to get a new payment amount? And we map out what each of those regulatory pathways translates into. So you can actually make an educated decision around which way do I want to go. The next big challenge is around clinical data. Oftentimes, a lot of founders are so focused on making sure we have the right clinical data for the FDA. And if you think about it, the FDA is much more focused on efficacy and safety. Can I use this product in a patient, and is it going to have harm? Is it going to do more good or more harm to the patient? What we've done recently is working with clients, identifying what are some of the key triggers and outcomes that payers want to see. So that when the client is doing their clinical studies, they don't do a study for the FDA. And I lived this through several startups where you do an FDA study with 60 patients, you come to market, you're all excited, and now you have to do a 200 patient study. That takes you 2 years to recruit and run through the study, millions of dollars, and you have a huge cash burn rate, right? Whereas if we work together early on and identify what are some of the key challenges and outcomes that are relevant from a payer point of view, what are some of the comparators you should have in your study and the length of study and so forth, those factors are incorporated in the initial study, and you can leverage the same study for the FDA as well as payers. So that translates into savings of 2 years possibly, and possibly millions of dollars, right? And then the third piece is reimbursements and afterthought. I'm about to get regulatory approval. I'm in the final discussions with the FDA. Oh, reimbursement person, come on in, help me out. I'm going to hire a reimbursement person, or I'm going to bring in an advisor. And at that point, the key challenge becomes a lot of the decisions that are critical are already solidly in place. So I remember, I'll give you an example on this one. I was at LSI last year, and at dinner, we're talking to one of the founders, and he pulls out a device. It's a device that's for migraines. He was going to use it. It's used at home. And we're walking through the device. He puts it on me to try, which was pretty cool. And I look at it and I say, wait, is this the entire device? Is this how the device works? Yep. This is going to be a durable medical equipment reimbursed through a DME. And having lived through that, that's my specialty. I was able within 5 minutes to say, look, this is not going to work. And I walk him through some of the challenges he's going to have. And he pushed back saying, no, we've looked at this. That's not an issue. Unfortunately, the next morning he finds me and says, I am so disappointed that I did not see you 2 years ago because we are weeks away from submitting to the FDA and I don't have a reimbursement pathway. I actually saw him again this year. They had gone back, they had redeveloped a new prototype that would fit the criteria for a DME, and they were about to submit to the FDA now. So those are the big challenges that I would say we help solve.
Oh, so even for the FDA submission, it would help them for that, right?
So not so much for the FDA submission. They would have gotten the previous product through the FDA as well. But the previous product that they had, the previous generation, would not qualify for reimbursement. Whereas with the new design, they had to follow,
Got
with
it.
the new design, they could carve out a new reimbursement pathway for themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. Got it. Okay, along this pathway of developing a medical device, after FDA approval, that's probably not a good time to come talk to you. When is a good time to talk to you? When the idea is still between the sheets, between mom and dad, or when?
I love that. Yeah, look, once I left Abbott Diabetes Care after launching Freestyle Libre, I went to Cala Health. And I was employee number 44 at Cala Health, and I helped them get their coding and their payment. Then I moved on to another startup, and I was employee number 2 at that startup, right? And the company there was built around, let's develop a product, and this was a wearable neuromodulation device for patients with Parkinson's. And every step of the way, we had reimbursement as the backbone of the company. So we were thinking about, as we're designing the protocol, is this something that's going to exclude us from, we want it to be used at home. So is this going to push us away from home use or into home use? Is this prototype going to allow us to get under a new HCPCS code, or is this going to push us into existing codes with a lower payment amount? So all of that was always there. So in terms of when should we talk about reimbursement, right? The key considerations are when you're developing a prototype, you want to make sure that the prototype you have in mind fits the reimbursement pathway that you want. 2, as you're looking at your regulatory pathways, identifying what the commercial and reimbursement implications of each of those pathways is. 3, if you're designing a clinical trial. If you're designing a clinical trial for the FDA, spend a little extra time. So plan this ahead. Don't come to me and say, look, in 3 weeks, I've got a study that's starting. It's a big rush. We can get to it, but let's plan ahead and let's get the best outcomes. So we maximize the dollars that we spend on the studies. Those would be the key areas where I'd want to work. And and obviously the big one is if you're doing a fundraising, a lot of investors nowadays want to see your reimbursement pathway. How are you going to get paid? So we work with clients at that stage as well.
Yeah, and I've heard that investors are starting to understand reimbursement a little bit more, and they're requiring it. So they've maybe been burned in the past. Do you think it's still as far as they should go, or do you think sophisticated investors should get more sophisticated still?
We can always get more sophisticated. The way I see it, especially in neuromodulation, we are in the Wild West right now, right? We're doing a lot of really innovative work, coming up with new modalities, addressing new illnesses, moving items from hospital to home care and vice versa. There's a lot of really exciting things happening. But the more exciting, the more novel an approach, the more critical reimbursement gets. Because oftentimes we move something from hospital to home. We're going to save hospitalization. We're going to reduce all these factors. We didn't design the product exactly as it needs to be to get the coding to fit under a specific code. So because we don't have a code, all those savings, all that hard work that we did can't be capitalized on. And like you said, I think investors are starting to understand that there's a coding, payment, and coverage. So if one of those is missing, there's challenges to overcome.
Okay, I want to talk about Cala Health. It's seen as a success in the industry as a wearable neuromodulation, but still was able to get pretty good coding. Do you want to talk about that? You said you were quite involved in that and helped get it through. So what made it work? What made it not work? What could have been improved? What was the intent? Everything like this. Give us the deets.
Sure. So Cala Health is an amazing company and they have a great product, right? So Cala Health addresses essential tremor in patients that have essential tremor. Currently, the tremors happen because the brain is misfiring. all right? And that's what translates down to the arm, and that's where the tremors come from. Patients that have essential tremors start off with beta blockers, anticonvulsives, drugs that have some pretty bad side effects, but they work well. But because of the side effects, patients drop off within 50% of patients drop off within about a year. Then there's really no alternatives for patients other than deep brain stimulation. And deep brain stimulation is highly invasive, very effective, but highly invasive, and it targets the VIM of the thalamus. Now, the founder of Cala Health was able to identify that by stimulating the radial and median nerves in a manner that's synced to the patient's tremor rhythm, brain rhythm, at an opposite frequency, you start acting like a noise-canceling headset. And that translates into picking up the tremors that's coming down, reversing it, and you reduce the tremors. That is fantastic. You're addressing a huge unmet need, and there were no alternatives at the time. So Cala was developing a market. They had conducted a study, about 66 patients, randomized clinical trial, well-designed, and they were able to leverage that to get through the FDA. Once they got through the FDA, they conducted another study, a single arm, pre-post of the patient, 3 months long, patients at home use. This was going to be a home use device, so they conducted a home use study. And again, great results, very consistent between the two studies. But as we started talking to payers, they said, look, this is not the type of study we want to see. The randomized clinical trial that you have isn't big enough. It's not long enough. So that doesn't answer our question. The other one is starting to be long enough, but we don't know about habituation. We want to see even longer data. There's really no comparator. How do we know that there's pre-post, but there's no sham control? So those were some of the challenges that we were starting to see. So kudos to the leadership. We helped design a new study, a larger, longer-term study that could actually get us to a positive yes. So while that study was going on, we also were going through CMS, Medicare, to get our codes. And originally we were told, look, you're very similar to TENS units, so you will just use the TENS units code. And we were able to demonstrate that we were different than TENS units. And again, a lot of kudos to the team. They had a substantial amount of clinical evidence that we leveraged, both on the mode of action. I think there was a functional MRI study that was conducted. There were, like I said, clinical studies. We leveraged all of that to get us new codes. Then Medicare said, all right, fine, we'll give you new codes, but you're still very close to TENS, so we'll price you at a TENS unit. And this is what happens to quite a few of the neuromodulation companies and devices that came through the same cycle as us. They ended up getting about $500 for their device over 5 years. And they had great clinical data for migraines, for ADHD, for a number of different factors. Medicare said it doesn't matter. Again, we were able to leverage the strategy that we had, the evidence that we had, to weave a great story that said, no, we are different than TENS. TENS pads and TENS units cannot do what we do. And again, it went back to differentiating and substantiating why we needed to get our price at the price point that it was. So we were able to overcome a Medicare negative coding and make a negative payment determination. And in 2024, the MACs, the Medicare Administrative Contractors, came out with a negative draft coverage policy for Cala's product. And Cala was able to leverage the evidence that we had generated with the larger study to overturn that negative into a positive LCD. But what I would say is these are all growing pains, right? When you're an industry leader, you're paving the way. Those are the challenges you have to face, right? Now, fortunately, Cala was very well funded, and we were able to move forward and build the evidence that was needed. But that's where some of the learnings come from, right? So if you're able to conduct that large study up front, you save burn rate of a few years, right? And things of that nature.
Yeah, that's impressive. And it's good that you were able to fight that and to be able to get that approved, because it basically makes or breaks the company, right? Getting, you said $500 for over 5 years, that's $10 a month versus significantly more than that, then that can be a huge difference. Are you able to sell your product for $500 or $15,000 or something like that?
The Cala's
5,000.
5,000 now. Yes.
5,000 now. Okay. Yeah, that's impressive. That's 10x. Not bad. Not bad at all.
Exactly. So I think that
So
was a good investment, if I may say
yeah,
so.
be able to get a 10x improvement in revenue so that can make your company survive or not. Yeah. So I know that the FDA I've heard that the FDA has been changing and that their guidance or their philosophy has been changing over time. Is there a unified reimbursement or coding strategy, or is it, you mentioned a lot of different payers and everything like this? Is it all fragmented? Is it a mosaic? Is there some kind of overarching theory or a way of thinking? I don't know. How could you summarize it?
Yeah. So it is an evolving landscape. That's, I think, the key takeaway. Medicare, CMS is still one of the key payers. So oftentimes what a lot of folks do is focus on CMS, get codes through CMS, and then push it down to the commercial payers. That's one approach. You also have Veterans Affairs and other different kinds of payers that you can focus on in the short term, but you definitely have to move towards CMS as the key guiding post, I would say. In terms of the activities that the FDA is doing, kudos to the FDA and CMS. They are coming together. They're trying to find ways to get product to patients earlier. However, a lot of the devil's in the detail. So at the high level, they just announced the rapid pathway. So for products that have a breakthrough device designation, there may be a path to coverage. This will replace TSET, which was another pathway that allowed patients to have access to products that were breakthrough, but only 5 products a year were chosen to fit into this guideline or into this process. So it's just worthwhile knowing what's available. And as we do our assessment of the different pathways, definitely regulatory pathways, I would say, we would look at, do you fit into one of these specific codes or policies that are being considered? And if so, let's consider it. If not, we can't change course necessarily. Let's make sure that we are building something that is reimbursable.
Okay. And then I know that the FDA, to do that approval process, you can have a pre-submission meeting and you're able to talk to them, kind of see what they're thinking about and how to approach that. And then also during the actual submission, you're talking to them. But I've heard that the coding is quite opaque. So they don't really talk to people. They don't go to conferences. You don't really know who the decision makers are. Is that true? So basically, people have to go talk to you and trust, okay, your experience from the Canadian healthcare system is accurate. And presumably you've walked people through, but of course it'd be best to get it straight from the horse's mouth. Like the actual decision makers, oh, what are they thinking? How do they do that? Is that accurate or how is that?
So it's definitely, there are ways to communicate with payers for sure. Right. And CMS, so the CAG group, the coverage analysis group, is open to meeting with people and companies earlier. But typically this happens to be larger companies that are much more established. And you go in and you talk about your clinical trial design. Is this sufficient? What else would you want to see? So this is actually helpful early on. But again, they don't have the same resources as the FDA, right? They're spread very thin. You have the different departments within the FDA, so they're focused on different areas, whereas across CMS, it's much more centralized, I would say. But what we do with clients, so what we go through all the time is we do have a network of retired medical directors that we have access to. So we can have some of these discussions from some recently retired, some longer retired medical directors that really understand how decisions are made on the other side, that can provide nuanced and detailed understandings of what we need to do.
And then, so this is the Neural Implant Podcast. We talk about neurotechnology. Is there something different for neurotech or implantables that's different than typical medical devices or anything else?
So I would say the biggest consideration for the engineers that are developing the product is figuring out where is this service or product going to be used, right? If a product is used at home versus in hospital versus in outpatient. So I'm thinking of a TMS device, right? So the TMS is evolving and it's going after new modalities. As those evolve, that evolution is happening, it's critical to think, is this going to be an outpatient, inpatient? Because the reimbursement in the inpatient will be different than the outpatient, than the home use. So as we're moving procedures and devices between site of care, I think it's critical for us to know where, and how we're going to get reimbursed.
So which one's better?
I'm a little biased, but I actually love so it depends. There is no the reimbursement answer. The lawyer answer is it depends. But I'm a big fan of home use, right? Patients want personalized care. How do you get better personalized care than on my own terms when I need it? Something that reacts specifically to me, as we're talking about closed loop systems. This is the future of personalized care. So at home, personalized care.
And that is the promise, right? Neurotech is meant to fix things, and presumably for the long term versus the short term acute in hospital stay or something like that. I think it does make sense. And I don't know, I do think that some sort of wearable 10 style like Cala Health thing or something like this they'll put it into a lower category, unfortunately. But yeah, it's pretty crazy. I guess at the end of the day, you are asking an entity to open up their wallet to pay a significant amount of money to be able to do this. So they have to have very good justification to do, just like anytime you buy something, you want to know that there's good evidence. You have a good expectation of getting or whatever for that. So the same thing, if you were paying out, you'd probably be asking a lot of similar questions.
We talk about value for money, right? That's all it comes down to.
Yeah, exactly. So I think you mentioned that a lot of people should be coming to you earlier, or they should get some reimbursement strategy earlier than they usually do. Are there other mistakes that maybe neurotech founders, neurotech company, medical device founders do that, I don't know, maybe annoys you or something you wish that they would do differently? Or if you had a magic wand, what would you change?
Two factors, and we've talked about them already, right? One is the FDA pathway. You can't use TENS as a predicate and then come and ask for a payment of 10x TENS units, right? You wouldn't pay that out of pocket yourself. You should not expect government and others to pay that. So if you don't consult the right advisor early on, you're tying our hands. That's one. And then the clinical study piece is really the second part. It's if we're able to address a few key outcomes early on, identify them and track them throughout the clinical trial, that has the potential to unlock access much sooner. So why not just do that?
Yeah, no, that's exciting. What's your read on neuromodulation, neurotech? Are we on an inflection point? Are we entering a golden age? Is it things going to get better? What do you think?
Oh my goodness. When I switched over from Abbott Diabetes Care to Cala Health, I was told the body is either electricity or plumbing. And we figured out the plumbing. We're just starting to tap into the electrical part. And that is so true. So I think the power of electroceuticals is immense. We are getting to the point where we're starting to have closed loop systems in place. And like I mentioned, closed loops is as close to personalized medicine as we're ever going to get, as far as I'm concerned. And on the commercial side, you start seeing the Noctrix acquisition by ResMed just earlier this week for 350 million approximately. I think a lot of investors and strategics are starting to see that there's a big gap between pharmaceuticals and procedures. And the wearables is definitely the way to go. And they provide a great solution for patients that have a high unmet need. And now that there's a commercial path forward, I think we're at the beginning of the golden age, like you said.
So people are starting to see commercial successes. Investors are starting to see commercial successes. Maybe reimbursement experts are seeing that this stuff actually works, and it's just a self-reinforcing flywheel and self-accelerating thing. So it's going to get better.
Exactly.
Yeah. I hope so. I hope so. As somebody in the field and podcast and making a neurotech startup of my own, I do hope so. Ali, this has been great. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to mention?
No, I want to say thank you to you for all you're doing in terms of educating your founders and your audience. I think that's critical. And if we can get the message out that don't just think about the FDA, think about commercialization. That's the next big hurdle. We'll be successful.
Excellent. Excellent. And hopefully they are able to learn something and be successful based on hearing from this. And maybe they reach out to you if they want to find out more information. So Ali, thank you so much. The information will be in the show notes. So thank you so much for coming on and share your knowledge.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Ladan.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.